Right now I'll have to
Yes, I think we are live on YouTube. Namaste everyone. My name is Vaishali Shah. I welcome each one of you to our session on Hindu culture and lifestyle. Today we are conducting this interview especially for IET. Yes, I think we are live on YouTube. Namaste everyone. My name is Vaishali Shah. I welcome each one of you to our session on. Yes, sorry, I think something went wrong. So this session is specially recorded for IETV, which is in Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean side of the world. Today we have Dr. Maxim Demchenko. Dr. Maxim, namaste.
Namaste, Vaishali ji.
Thank you so much for accepting our this invitation for the special occasion of Ram Navami. Today we are going to talk about what is the importance of Ramayana and Ayodhya. So before I start, I would like to read out your introduction to our audience so that they know who you are. Dr. Maxim Demchenko is the Associate Professor of Moscow State Linguistic University, Ram Katha and Storytelling at Moscow Theatres, writer and translator from Hindi and French. The latest book, Pushpavatika, Garden of Poetry, which is an anthology of translations from English into Russian of Ram Bhakti poetry and prose covering several centuries from Goswami Tulsidas to contemporary Ayodhya-based poets. Most of the poems and text were translated for the first time into a non-Indian language. The project is dedicated to construction works of Ram Mandir in Ayodhya, which is inaugurated by Shri Narendra Modi ji in August 2020. So, Maxim ji, बहुत स्वागत है आपका. Before we start our question answer session, I would like to know something more about you. How did you start your journey and why you chose Ramayana?
Namaskar, Mitro. I'm happy to speak to the audience from Trinidad, especially for the IE channel. And thank you, Vaishali ji, for interviewing me, for inviting me to this show. First of all, I would like to start with a brief shloka in Sanskrit. That will be the introduction to my interview, to my speech. Om Shri Mate Ramanandaya Namaha. Shri Janaki Vallabho Vijayate Sitanatha Samarambam Ramanandarya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Rama Rameti Ramiti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tattulyam Ramanama Varanane. Shubh Shri Ram Navami Mahotsav. Happy Shri Ram Navami to everyone. I will probably say a few words about my first steps in my interest in Ramayana. Ramayana has always been an important part of Indian culture and of Indian-Russian cooperation, because since my childhood, I have known the translations of especially Ramacharitamanus into Russian language, because the first translation was published in 1949, right after the World War II, by Professor Barannikov. He is well known both in Russia and in India. And we have the Valmiki Ramayana translated into Russian as well, but not completely. Still the work on its translation is going on. Still there are two final kandas of the Ramayana to be translated into Russian. So basically, I have known Ramayana since my childhood, and Ram was an important hero, an important personality for myself since my childhood. And I was fascinated by the love story between Sita and Ram, and of course by personal qualities of Ram, personal characteristics of Ram. And when I was about 15 years old, I got to know that in Russia there are people belonging to this Hare Krishna movement, and I thought that probably at the same time there should be followers of Ram somewhere. And at that time I didn't know that basically most Ram Bhaktas and most gurus from the Ramanandi tradition, they're only Hindi speaking. So one has to learn Hindi first of all to do a research on this tradition. But anyway, I didn't lose hope. And after my graduation, I started working as a translator interpreter. And my first international trip and working experience was in Malaysia. And in Malaysia, there's a huge Indian community, as per the official estimation, around 6+ percent of Malaysians are Hindus, but in reality there are more, because in Malaysia there's such a phenomenon as hidden Hinduism. For example, if a Hindu man wants to marry a Muslim woman, a Muslim girl, he would have to convert to Hinduism, to Islam, but at the same time he would continue practicing Hinduism at home. So the real estimation of the percentage of practicing Hindus is quite a complicated issue in that country. So in Malaysia, I got to know more about Hindu culture and Hindu civilization, and I decided to write my PhD thesis in Hinduism. This is how I came to India for the first time. It was long ago. It was 2006, so it was more than 15 years ago. And since that time, I started my research. So I keep on coming to India for several months every year. I first studied Hindi and did my original research for the PhD thesis. And I defended my PhD in 2011. And since that time, I've been doing like official researchers and teachers work there, because I come to India to teach at Indian universities as an invited professor, because my main job is here in Russia, in Moscow. This is Moscow State Linguistic University. And I teach languages. I teach Hindu philosophy, Indian philosophy. And for the past few years, I have been performing Ramayana as a katha teller, storyteller, in Russian, Hindi, and in English. So we had several successful programs here in Moscow, in St. Petersburg. In St. Petersburg, it was in Hindi. At the Indian consulate here in Moscow, it was in Russian, with some Hindi chanting and Sanskrit chanting. So as a result, we are trying to promote Ramayana, and I wouldn't say Ram Bhakti as it is, because we are not doing missionary activities here. We are missionaries in the cultural sense of the word. That is Bharatiya Sanskriti. Bharatiya Sanskriti is our main goal, to spread the message of Ramayana in a cultural way, but also in a spiritual way, because spirituality is beyond borders and beyond religion. So this is how my life is going on in respect of the Ramayana.
Very interesting, Dr. Maxim. As I understand, Ram resides within us, and we are probably the next generations of Ram, because Ram was considered to be our forefather, or the ancestor, or the main beach from where we all come from, as our history says. So why did you think about Ramayana? As in, what do you think about Ram? Because first, let's understand the personification of Ram. Ram is not only one person. There is a lot more to Ram's names, and even to Ram's personality. And there is so much to learn. Ram itself is a university. So what do you think?
Well, I believe that Ram is really a multi-layer personality. So that would be a really long conversation. It would be a lecture course, like could be extended to a few months probably, if we try to analyze the personality of Ram. But I would say that there are three main layers that each Indian and each foreigner who studies Ramayana should take into consideration. Then the first layer is Shri Ram is Bhagavan, that is the supreme reality according to the Hindu religion. And within the Hindu religion, within the Hindu tradition, there are many different schools and sects, what we call Sampradaya and Parampara. And according to each of them, the idea of Ram would be slightly different, because when in the West, people think think about Hinduism, they would have a tendency to equate Hinduism with Advaita Vedanta, as Advaita Vedanta is extremely popular in the West. And this is thanks to Swami Vivekananda, who came to the United States in the late 19th century to propagate Vedanta and in form of Advaita. And as we know, according to Advaita Vedanta, all deities, including Ram, are manifestations of the one supreme consciousness that is basically impersonal, that is the beyond, the Brahman, what we call the Brahman. At the same time, in India, there are traditions that consider Lord Vishnu to be the supreme deity, and that is objectively the supreme deity, unlike in Advaita Vedanta. Well, in Advaita Vedanta and in the so-called general Hinduism, we can choose any deity as our Ishtadevata, chosen deity, and that will be the supreme for us, but not for our neighbors, for example. But there are traditions like Vaishnava traditions in India that believe that Vishnu is objectively the supreme being and other deities somehow proceed from him. And among Vaishnavas, there are Ram Bhaktas, and for them, Ram is the supreme Lord, objectively, that is the Parabrahm, Shri Ram, Sarveshwar, Shri Ram. And these devotees are represented by Shri Ramananda Sampradaya, historically started in the 14th century by Shri Ramananda Acharya. But of course, followers of this tradition believe that it had existed before Ramananda Acharya, and it can be traced back to Ram himself, who is the original Godhead, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So as you see, even if we consider the spiritual perspective on Ram, that would be multi-layered. There will be different views, different schools, but all of them would agree that this or that way he is Bhagavan. He is the supreme reality to which we can be devoted. And this is why I started this presentation, this interview with a shloka from the Ram Raksha Stotra, which is considered by scholars to be one of the most ancient written texts in the tradition of Ram Bhakti. Well, apart from Ramayana, of course, because Ramayana is the basic source, but still it does not belong exclusively to the Ram Bhakti tradition, it's universal. But Ram Raksha Stotra is already a part of the Ram Bhakti tradition, of the developed one. And in that Stotra, Bhagwan Shiv is telling his wife, Parvati, Rama Rameti Rameti, Rame Rame Manorame. And what he's trying to say that I'm always chanting this name of Ram because it is more powerful than any other name of the Lord. So whenever I pronounce the name Ram just once, it is equal to Sahasranama, that is 1008 names of Vishnu. So it means that with 1 second, I can cover the whole part of Sahasranama Stotra, of 1008 names of Bhagavan Vishnu. So this is the religious perspective, the religious, spiritual, adhyatmic, and dharmic level. But the second layer, which is quite important, but unluckily forgotten, and well, it had been forgotten for decades due to probably British colonialism and British scholarship. This is the historical layer, historical base, seed of the personality of Ram. So if we are trying to analyze any itihasas or Purana, and the word itihasa actually literally means history or story, itihas. Even in contemporary Hindi, that would be history. Then in itihasas, there should be a certain historical basis. Okay? It's not just a collection of fairy tales, of legends, of some images. Like, you know, Gandhiji used to believe, for example, that in Mahabharata, the war is not real, but it is symbolic that Pandavas are 5 senses and Kauravas, they are vices, right? So, well, there can be symbolic dimension in every scripture, you can say, but it's interesting to figure out whether there is a historical seed in these stories, because they're itihasas by definition, history books, you can say. And well, these questions seems to be very important. It became very important in the latest decades because Hindus have been fighting for the Ram Janmabhoomi for decades, which is the birthplace, considered to be the birthplace of Ram himself in Ayodhya. And around in the 16th century, the army of Babur, that is his general Mir Baqi, destroyed the historical temple that was located there, and it's well proven by the Archaeological Commission. So those who are interested can investigate further in that case, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has already taken the final decision on this issue. But it's an interesting archaeological story. And well, and now, just a couple of years ago, the historical justice was restored, and the Ram Mandir is being constructed in Ayodhya, and that is thanks to the Supreme Court and thanks to the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Well, the problem still remains if you believe that you are fighting for birthplace of a mythological character. It doesn't make much sense. So there should be some historicity, and it's not even a question of whether this point is exactly the exact place where Ram was born. The important point is that this is the place that was believed to be his birthplace. It was very important for Hindus, and as we know in Hindu tradition, if devotees worship Bhagwan at a certain spot, this Bhagwan appears at this spot. So this is the tradition. So Ayodhya was that kind of spot, and this is why his historical position, historical layer of Sri Ram's existence became very, very important in the recent decades. The interesting fact, by the way, that I'm always telling my students, and both in India and in Russia, there is such a researcher, Hans Backer, who wrote a famous volume on Ayodhya. It's the very basic volume for anyone who is interested in the archaeology and culture of Ayodhya. And it was published sometime in 1980s, if I'm not mistaken, 1984, but I have to check it up. So the interesting thing that is that he mentions there in that paper that the Hindu temple had existed there on that spot before the Mughal invasion. It had existed there. It was 1980 something, and after that there were many speculations that this is a fake, this is a falsified history. But no, even Hans Becker, who is a very profound scholar, he mentions that the temple had existed before the Mughal conquest. So this is the historical layer of Ram and its importance. And the third layer that should be mentioned here is that Ram is also a strong cultural image for India, because whenever people are coming to India from any country of the world, what do they know? They know some superficial things, of course. They know Taj Mahal, they know some, Goa, maybe Goa dance, this hippie community is staying there. They know probably something about Indian food and yoga. I mean, those who are not specialists, just general people coming to India as tourists. But Ramayana is something that is fascinating for the rest of the world. This is the treasure of Indian culture that is understandable for all people everywhere in the world. As the core story is the story about a brave warrior, an ideal person, ideal man. This is a love story also, and it teaches many aspects of the love life and family life. So this is why Ramayana is probably the first thing that India can offer to the world in terms of culture and literature. And there are many vehicles for this powerful tool, for this powerful instrument. For example, one of the main vehicles is Ram Leela, which is the performance based on the Ramayana, and this is what we are trying to revive here in Moscow. For the past year, we had we had staged around 5 Ram Leelas in Moscow, and they were full of people all the time. So Ram Leela is something which is a great vehicle for Indian culture. It would be really good if Indian side would support development of the Ram Leela movement all around the world, because this is how we can talk to people of different culture, and it can be modified because traditional Ram Leela of Ayodhya may not be understood perfectly by, let's say, Americans or French people or Russians or any people in the world, but we have to keep the traditional bases and we can modify it according to the local taste and some local understanding of let's say, music and everything. But I would say that Indian music is really warmly welcomed around everywhere around the world. When sitar starts playing at our Ram Leela, just people, even if they are 100% atheists and communists or whatever, they just plunge into meditation when they hear the sound of sitar, and I will start chanting verses of Ramayana, of Tulsi Ramayana, Varnanamata Sanganam Rasanam Chandasamapi Mangalanam Chakartaro Vande Vani Vinayako. And with music, it sounds good. So people plunge into meditation. So these three aspects I would present as the most important in Ram, that the position of the Lord, of the Supreme Being, Supreme Consciousness, the position of a historical image, and the position of a cultural hero.
Sounds very interesting, and I'm very glad to have this very clear clarification on the personification of Ram, because Ram has itself is a huge university. I mean, there is so much we can learn from just one word and just one God, I can say.
This is why he is considered to be the supreme personality by Ram Bhaktas. We can learn everything from one person.
Yes, yeah, that is the reason the Bhagwan word is perfectly synonym to Ram, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, so now let's understand the importance of Ayodhya in today's context. Only having Ram Mandir is not enough. I think it's time that we tell people the importance of Ayodhya in our lives, because it's really important that people know that what Ayodhya is and why Ayodhya is so important to us. So what do you think? You have some research done on Ayodhya as well, right? So please share something about that.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the reason why I dedicated my latest book to the construction of Ram Mandir in Ayodhya. And in the foreword for this book, I mentioned that Ayodhya, due to the latest developments, is, well, I don't know if it's a good word, is doomed to become, is destined to become the center of Indian culture, important center of Indian culture and Indian spirituality. And probably it can also become a kind of a TV station. I mean, not in literal sense, as like it won't be a big TV channel there, but a TV station spreading the good news of Ram, of Sita and Ram, and of their earthly leelas, as we call them in Hindu tradition. It can become the city that really represents the very heart of India, because mostly, well, tourist spots in India are very interesting, of course, and people are going to explore caves of Ajanta, for example. It's really marvelous. And Rishikesh as a yoga center attracts so many people from around the world. And places like Jaipur, they're world famous as well. And of course, they're enriching the world culture, they're enriching our understanding of what India is. But Ayodhya is has always been, like historically, at least since times of Vikramaditya, who was one of the rulers of Ayodhya in the past, is always represented the very heart in terms of how to understand the very basis of Indian culture, because other places, they mostly refer to some outer cultural, maybe sometimes political, historical manifestations. But here we come across the very heart of India. We look into the very heart of India. And by the way, this is not only because of Ram. This is first of all because of Ram, but historically, Ayodhya had been, before the Mughal invasion again, had been the center of other Indian religions as well. Buddhism was flourishing, and according to some research and excavation, there was a big Buddhist center around the contemporary Mani Parvat. This is the mountain in Ayodhya that is that used to be a kind of dowry for Sita and Ram marriage. And then we also had the big Jain community there. in Ayodhya, and still there's an important Jain center because it's the birthplace of one of the Tirthankars, that is the holy people of Jainism, founders of Jainism. So this is a kind of not just the very heart of India, but also kind of the spiritual center for many religions. And at the same time, even if people are not religious, they are not spiritual in that sense of the word, still they would understand how the history of India had been developing since ancient times to the modern era. There's an interesting thing about Ayodhya. According to some local narratives, Ayodhya is also the place. It can be new for many people, but this is a local narrative also, by the way, presented by Hans Becker in his volume Ayodhya. But Ayodhya used to be a place where Brahma started creating the world. So the contemporary Indian identity, as Hindu identity, is being built on also from something, from the first brick of the temple in Ayodhya, probably, like a new identity, which is a really post-colonial identity. This is the second thing I wanted to mention in respect of Ayodhya, apart from being the heart of India. All other sports in India, most of them, they was in this or that way related to the colonial legacy in India, because mostly the British scholarship had always been interested in these places, and we have to thank, of course, great scholars. They used to work there, but at the same time, there were many things that were done in order to establish the British Raj at those places. And Ayodhya, somehow, it was already quite a small spot on the map to be really interesting for the Brits, and that is due to the Mughal invasion, of course. So it preserved a certain purity of Indian culture, of that real Indian culture. And when I came to Ayodhya for the first time, it was 2010, I felt like I plunged into 1920s. That was my first impression, that there are temples, yeah, they are decaying, they should be supported, because construction works are of course important, and reconstruction works are of course important, otherwise we run the risk of losing certain legacy. But at the same time, I would say you plunge into the atmosphere of 1920s or maybe of 1940s, the fight for independence, this era. So Ayodhya can be the first brick in the Ram Mandir, can be the first brick in a truly post-colonial India, like in a truly independent in all senses of the word, in a truly self-propelled, as we would say, about a mechanism. So this is the importance of Ayodhya, in my opinion, and this is why, surprisingly, most people around the world have no idea about Ayodhya. I will tell you that when in Russia I speak about Ayodhya, only those who are really interested in Indian culture would know that, and some people who heard some political news about Ayodhya, then they would know. Otherwise, most people are not aware of Ayodhya at all. So we have great work to do ahead in making Ayodhya known and popular and famous.
Sounds very interesting. So your main research is in Ram Bhakti and the poetries which is related to Ram. Please share something about that, because it's a very unique subject. I have seen someone picked up, to propagate, to do research, and I think you have written some commentary on that. So tell us, what do you think, and give us some, please share a couple of lines from those Ram Bhakti songs as well.
Okay, well, actually, what I'm trying to do now, I'm trying to research on the so-called Ram Rasik tradition, Ram Rasik Parampara. And well, surprisingly, most people, when we speak about Ram, they mostly refer to the Valmiki Ramayana, and they refer to Goswami Tulsidas Ramayana. There are two main sources, which is already really good. At the same time, both sources, especially Valmiki Ramayana, mostly teaches that Sri Ram is Maryada Purushottam, which is obviously correct. But Maryada Purushottam, sometimes people feel like, okay, Maryada means it's something boring. And even there are comparisons even in the Hindu community and even abroad that, okay, Krishna is Lila Purushottama, that is the playing form of the Lord, and Ram is Maryada Purushottama, that is the noble form of the Lord. And the noble means boring for most people because you just strictly follow Dharma and you don't really have a love line. But the interesting thing is that since the time immemorial, not immemorial, of course, but since the times of Valmiki Ramayana, there was a love line in the story of Ram as well. And even Valmiki, in the very beginning of the Ramayana, I don't remember the exact verse, but those who are interested can check it. He says that Ramayana is full of Shringar. And Shringar, what is Shringar? Basically, Shringar is the love sentiment. It means that in the story of Ram, there are all these things like Shringar Bhav, that is the loving Bhav, and that is the so-called Madhurya Bhav, the loving sentiment. And then I got to know that in Ayodhya, and not only in Ayodhya, also in Mithila, in Chitrakoot, there is the so-called Ram Rasik tradition, which is still alive. It was started in the 17th century, probably. Well, at least the first famous poet, the first famous writer of this tradition was Goswami Agradas, or Agradevacharya. And he wrote the famous work, which is called Dhyan Manjari. Which represents Sita and Ram as a loving couple, and the meditation on them also produces the Madhurya Bhav. Then what happens? The tradition is going on, and in Ayodhya there are two main places where Rasik tradition is flourishing. This is Lakshman Kila, and this is Sadguru Sadan. They are not far from one another. So Lakshman Kila is the spot where one of the great Rasik poets, Swami Yugalananya Sharan, used to live and work. He lived in the 19th century. And at that place, this romantic Rasik tradition is going on. And then I went further to Sadguru Sadan, and a few years back, I decided to study this tradition and this poetry there. So this is where I study myself, and I'm trying to present these ideas. And there was an interesting contemporary saint, Swami Ramharshan Dasji. He lived in Ramharshan Kunj in Ayodhya. So probably I would try to present a few lines from his work, because his language is closer to contemporary Hindi. Because if I start chanting, for example, Yugalananya Sharan, then I would have to give an extended commentary, and that would be probably quite difficult in the form of this interview. But this is what Swami Ramharshan Dasji says. Bandau Sadguru Rasika Vara Yugalapada Dharisatha Jaki Kripa Katakwa Shake Rasalahi Bayo Sanatha. He wants to say, I'm bowing down in front of the true Guru, the teacher of romantic sentiments, because he himself stays at the lotus feet of the youthful couple, that is Sita and Ram, and by the grace of this Rasik Guru, we can taste this sentiment of Madhurya Bhav. Brahmaram Avadesha Kumara Nirguna Saguna Keradhara Karana Karya Pare Sukhasara Rasamaya Kahi Jehi Vede Pukara Parabrahma Paramartha Rupa Avichala Akala Anadi Anupa So Prabhutina Dhama Mahabhanse Kari Lila Jiva Sahita Prakasho. The youthful prince of Ayodhya, Ram, is the supreme deity, and he is the basis of both the absolute beyond the qualities and of the personal Lord. So what he's trying to say is that the romantic sentiment for this tradition is even higher than Nirguna Brahm, than the supreme consciousness. So this is the case when God is love in the literal sense, you can say. And by the way, there is a basis in the Upanishads for this statement, because Upanishads say, we all know these Mahavakyas, Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, but there's one more, Raso Vaisaha. Raso, it means the supreme being is Ras, and Ras is exactly the romantic sentiment. So this is, and Rasic tradition is not really widely known in India and abroad. So this is why we are trying to do our best to present it to the audience, both in India and abroad. So when I speak to the, let's say, Indian audience, to Indian students, in most cases for them, it's also something new.
Sounds very interesting. So at the closing of this interview, what would you like to say about Ramayana and a message to our viewers in Trinidad and Tobago? Because this interview is about, is going to get telecasted on the occasion of Ram Navami. So what would you like to say?
First of all, I would like to wish our viewers in Trinidad and Tobago a very happy Ram Navami. And I wish they would make this day an occasion to remember Lord Ram, Sita and Ram, and to reminisce about their pastimes, about their leelas. People living far from India sometimes tend to forget their legacy. So such festivals like Ram Navami is a great occasion to get together again, to get united, and to get back to their common legacy. So this is the first message that I'd like to deliver. And the second one is the message of Shri Ram himself, who says, Sakrudeva prapannaya tavasmiti chaya chate abhayam sarvabhudebhyo dadamyatad vratam mama. Shri Ram says that whoever asks me for protection, whether even if that person is my personal enemy, like in case of Vibhishana, because this verse is related to the story of Vibhishana, even in this case, I promise that I'll give that person full protection. So happy Ram Navami, and please study Ramayana, chant Ram Nam, and be happy. Jai Shri Shri Siya Ram.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maxim ji, for your time and for such a valuable contribution about Ramayana. And I'm sure our viewers in Trinidad and Tobago will definitely cherish and remember the message you have shared with them. Thank you so much. Namaste. Namaste.
Thank you very much. Jai Shri Ram.